Liam's POV. The first time I saw her was when she stepped out of the car in her elegant red dress with another girl following behind. Despite her pale face, the red girl stood up to her fears and walked across the field of vampires, reaching the front door. At that time, I was standing on the balcony, narrowing my eyes at her. Putting my hands on the railings, I sucked a deep breath as soon as she neared the door. A sweet scent drifted in the air, entering my nostrils and filling my lungs with pleasure. The corners of my lips curved up subconsciously. I had never felt like this before. No human could smell as sweet as this girl. It almost felt like I had a dessert. Licking my lips, I sucked in a deep breath again, and this time, the aroma of her blood was closer than before. She was standing right below me. It took all of my energy to control myself and jump on her. Gripping the railings, I inhaled again as if my life depended on that smell. It wasn't until she strolled inside the front door that I woke up from my daze. Just what was I doing? How could I lose my control just because of a weak human? Rubbing my forehead, I walked inside my bedroom and narrowed my eyes at my one and only loyal subordinate. He bowed down and respectfully. I furrowed my brows after seeing my subordinate, who was supposed to act as a spy in the neighboring nation. What happened? You weren't supposed to be here. This man was supposed to be a spy for 10 whole years. What the hell was he doing? The subordinate didn't dare to raise his head and only said in a low voice, "They found out about our plans and killed most of our spies." He wiped the sweat from the back of his hand and stuttered nervously, "I escaped with 2 more people." Color drained from my face hearing that. I pressed my lips in a thin line and asked, "How?" I don't know. Perhaps there was a spy among us? This was absurd. A spy among spies? Ridiculous! I took a deep breath to calm myself and glanced at him coldly. "Did you find anything?" He pursed his lips and shook his head. Seeing his response, I threw the glass on the ground that shattered into pieces. "What the hell were you doing all this time?" The subordinate trembled seeing my voice and said, "Master." His lips quivered. The Britain Vampires Association is strict. Not even an ant can enter the place without permission, what to speak of us. "Did you find something?" I asked again in my low voice that sounded even more dangerous. "I found a piece of news." I raised my eyebrows, gesturing to him to continue. "The British King is going to act again." I kept my face expressionless, but my heart was raging fire. The British King was the most ruthless and worst enemy you could get. Waving my hand at the subordinate, I sat on the bed. The man stood up from the bed and strolled away. I was a born vampire of the 20th century, not knowing the sufferings of a human being. We were not devils, just a little different from humans. The only difference was that our cells died very slowly. It was as if something had caused our cells to have prolonged life. But we could only survive on blood. Blood would flow throughout our bodies like humans, but we cannot generate new blood. Food was almost a waste when we consumed it. The only good thing was that our lifeline was enhanced. We could live up to 400 to 500 years. My father was nearly 400, but that wasn't why he was bedridden these days. I remember how my father was hurt very well. That memory was deeply ingrained in my brain that I couldn't forget no matter what. It happened about 16 years ago, when I found a British Association spy among us, who had secretly planned to uproot the throne of American vampires. I wasted no time in finding a group of spies to infiltrate the enemy kingdom. But before we could bore fruits of our efforts, they found out that we sent spies and kicked my subordinates out. The fist against the belt sheath tightened automatically when I thought about those greedy vampires residing in Britain. They had tried to take away the American throne many times, even spied and used several tricks, but they had been unsuccessful. That enemy spy was one of their attempts to go against my father. Don't get me wrong. I hated my father, but that didn't mean I would just sit back and endure everything that happened against him. I would be equally infuriated seeing such events. But how did the Briton king know about the existence of my subordinates among his people? I was still confused about this. Perhaps there really was a spy. My thoughts drifted off to only one person who could do this, my formidable enemy, George Evans, who was also my cousin. He was the person who loved to wear black and colluded with the enemy kingdom many times. My chest burned in anger because of him. Even if I knew what he did and how he colluded with enemies every time to strike back and snatch the American throne, I was helpless. I couldn't touch a single hair on his body. I glared at the floor thinking that. And the reason was the damned team of vampires council. Yes, there was something like that to control the king. If the king was to become a criminal, the council members would make proper judgment. But who would have thought that even the council had a Briton vampire spy among them? Did he find out about the plan as well? Or was there someone else hidden among us? I tapped my finger on my chin. Frustration rose in my heart because my thoughts were getting nowhere and I was in a messy situation. The enemy king figuring out my plans would mean grave danger falling upon us, and it was all George's fault. How can a man be so greedy? That vile man. Only he could leak secrets. But how the hell did he know about the spies among the enemy kingdom? The spies were originally supposed to spend a decade gathering friends and support to rise at the top. They were supposed to become the closest subordinates of the king and kill him. If the British king figured it out, then George would have figured it out too. But how? My eyes narrowed slightly. Was there someone hidden in the shadows? The possibility was extremely high. The thought of someone plotting against me filled me with rage. It almost felt as if the era of the Second Vampires' War came back. Everything seemed to repeat in a circle. At that time, magicians were involved. When I thought of those magicians, I snorted. Those sneaky bastards lived among humans before vampires came into existence, completely hiding their presence. No one knew about their existence. And in the modern world, only vampires managed to be out in the open. Who knew if the magicians were still present? And that British king is going to act again. I whispered to myself, looking at the ceiling above me in a daze. Perhaps there really was a spy among us. How good it would be if I was a human being. I used to be a normal human being until I turned 10 years old and became a vampire. That was when my mother disappeared mysteriously, and I couldn't help but blame my father. How could I not blame him? I had always seen red marks on the neck of my mother. As a kid, I used to think that was a bug bite, but after becoming a vampire, I realized that those marks were from my father. And all my anger was thrown on him. Things between us got even worse when my father refused to give me an answer. I had asked him about why he converted so many humans into vampires. All I got in response was silence and a sentence, "You'll know when you grow up." I didn't know the truth, and I still don't, but I have matured enough to rationally. I don't usually take my anger out on my father, not when he is already bedridden. The only relief was that I wasn't anywhere like my father, no matter what rumors spread among humans. Someone even said that I had killed innocent family members of a servant vampire. People believed that without even knowing the truth. The people I had punished back then weren't the family members of that spy, but his accomplices, who spread such rumors about me. I had no idea. But I didn't care. I never spared a single glance at the humans. I still hate the rumor that said I was identical to my father. But I really wasn't like him. To be honest, I rarely saw him as a child. How could I know that he used to be cruel and ruthless? Even our vampire history said that the old king, Derek, used to be a cruel man who was responsible for turning 10,000 people into vampires. "Master, are you ready?" the servant asked, bowing his head as I opened the door. "Yes." "Take me downstairs." I threw everything about my past in the back of my head and headed downstairs. I had just joined the party for fun, not for the sake of finding a human partner. What I wanted was to protect America's Vampire Association against enemies, not someone to have vampire children with. But all of these thoughts flew out of my head when I had seen her outside a while ago. Her aroma embraced my heart, controlling me against my will. All my plans crumbled into dust. Before I could even reject, my lips went against me to slip out a few words of the agreement before the servant. Damn it. She wasn't even my mate, and her blood controlled me to this extent. I gritted my teeth and continued to follow the old servant. The memory of that sweet aroma was fresh in my mind. I licked my lips again, tracing the sharp teeth with my soft and cold tongue. How good would it be to taste a single drop of her blood? Would her skin smell as good as her blood? A trace of warmth found its way inside my heart, embracing me at the memory. I was so immersed that I ignored all the thoughts about fleeing away from the scene. How could I run away when I found something interesting? By the time I reached the hall, the party had already started. I sniffed and got a trace of that familiar smell. But when I looked in her direction, I frowned. A familiar man in black was also eyeing the girl in red. It was George. Anger flooded in my heart upon seeing that man. He was another thorn in my eyes, always trying to go against me. I rushed and stood in front of him before he could even start walking toward her. Glaring at the man, I said, "Anyone, but not her." He flashed an evil smirk, making me even angrier. I wanted to chop off his head. I knew his mind was thinking of all the tricks he could use to snatch that girl away. Our prince finally eyed a girl. That's interesting. He casually leaned on the bar and stared at the girl in red, hugging her arms. Licking his lips, he grinned. "Wouldn't that be interesting if I caught her before you?" "You won't." I stared at his face without blinking, trying to establish my authority. "Oh? So you're threatening me?" He walked closer to me and smiled. "Wait and watch, dear prince, or else I'll take her away." Before I could even react, the man in black flashed and moved before the girl in a dress. I saw him eyeing the girl for a few seconds before settling his gaze on the girl behind her. A smile spread on his lips as he leaned toward the red girl, sniffing her hair. I took a step forward in irritation, but thankfully, the man chose the girl in purple, leaving a sobbing woman behind. I didn't focus on the man in black. He wasn't worth it. My eyes caught the red girl's shaking and trembling figure. Her tears decorated her delicate face, tracing a line down her cheeks. I squinted my eyes at the man in black, who dragged the girl away. Was it a way to take revenge against me? If it was, he had been successful. My future partner was left with a wrong impression of vampires just because he took her companion away before selection started. I watched the red girl crying, sobbing, and screaming her companion's name. But no one listened to her. Before anyone else could be attracted to her, I headed over to the blonde host and said, "That girl." I pointed at the red girl. "Belongs to me." A grin formed on his face as he looked in the direction. "Emily Brown? Nice choice." Before waiting for my response, he called her name. The maids came, and they were ordered to take the girl away to my bedroom. I didn't follow right away. My eyes trailed after the maids until they disappeared upstairs. "Tell me about her." "She's the granddaughter of John Brown. Just turned 18. I raised my eyebrows. "So, this is her first time?" The blonde nodded and got back to his microphone, announcing different names. I walked away and soon reached my bedroom upstairs. Turning on the light, I saw a familiar red girl, Emily, curled up on the ground. A sweet aroma entered my lungs as I sniffed multiple times. That's it. Her scent crossed the borders of my lungs and filled my heart, calming my inner demon. This was what I wanted. Now, I just had to ask whether this girl would give herself to me willingly or not. If she were unwilling, I wouldn't touch her. But if she were, I would thrust deep inside her body, marking her mine. A thick scent of her sweat would spread in the room. It would be enough to last for an entire lifetime. Her willingness would also fill me with the extra energy that would make me even more powerful. And with that power, I would be able to accomplish my goals. This girl was extraordinary and a virgin. I licked my lips silently at her figure. "Get up." Emily ignored me and shrunk in the corner. I said, "Get up." I said impatiently. "And now, please let me go." Her voice was so soft that it could melt the ice in an instant. I silently watched her little trembling form. It wasn't like I didn't know she was afraid, but I couldn't just leave the girl alone. Not after I had smelled her already. Her thick rosy scent was stamped in my mind for eternity. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't forget this girl. But she wasn't willing. What should I do? If I snatched her virginity away, not only I wouldn't get any energy, I would also face setbacks. I wouldn't get the extra powers that I wanted to. After the mating ritual, every male vampire would become as powerful as a wizard. I wanted such power too. Only then I would be able to defeat the British king. Gritting my teeth, I walked toward her slowly. If I couldn't mark her tonight, I could at least give her a faint warning. She shouldn't choose anyone else before I could mark her. I grabbed her jaw, pressed her beneath me, and sniffed her wonderful scent. I nearly lost myself in her arms. It wasn't until I saw her struggling with all she had. I paused. What the hell was I doing? I had nearly lost my control. I took a deep breath. Taking the aroma within my lungs, I backed up and walked away from the room before I could do anything to Emily without her consent. I needed to calm down. My crotch bulged and appeared as a little mountain, angrily glaring at me for leaving the girl alone. Pursing my lips, I headed straight for the gym. Opening the door, I threw my jacket on the bench and found the punching bag. It didn't take me more than a few seconds to start my night routine. I would always relieve my frustration of the day by punching for a few hours. But this time, frustration lasted so long that I exercised the entire night. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and gasped, leaning my weight onto the punching bag. That human. How could she control me like this? If it weren't for her sweet aroma, I would have punished her already. Soon enough, she would be mine, and then I will let her know the consequences of controlling me. It was already 7 a.m. by the time I cleaned myself up and went to my bedroom. Standing beside the bed, I stared at her sleeping figure tucked under the quilt. Her lips were parted as she took a steady breath. Her eyes shut closed, and eyebrows furrowed. God knows what she was dreaming about, but I could see it wasn't anywhere pleasant. After a few seconds, she opened her eyes, yawned, and rubbed her eyes lazily. At her carefree figure, I squinted my eyes. Her smell grew more assertive as soon as she woke up. I took a few breaths to suck her scent and calm my restless heart. I should get away from her again before I lose my control and jump on the bed. Taking a few shuddered breaths, I licked my lips and said, "So, you're up, I see. Let's talk about how you'll serve me." The moment I said these words, her body froze as if she had just seen a spider. I snorted at her appearance but paused for a moment. When she didn't utter a word, my patience had already reached its limits. Staring at her sharply, I asked, "I said something, and you dare to ignore me?" After threatening her for a while, she shrank back in her quilt. But I couldn't believe the next thing she blurted out was a wish to see her grandpa. I was stupefied at her appearance. Did she really think I would take all of her blood away and kill her? It was true that we high-level vampires wouldn't need human blood to survive, but some residents in my pack still hurt their human partners just for blood. It was what I hated the most. But I certainly wouldn't tell Emily that I was almost a virgin vampire. Also, her blood scent was so alluring that I didn't think I would be able to control it if I ever jumped on her. I took a deep breath to distract myself from that intoxicating smell and agreed. It was only a small wish, and this girl would become my human partner. Such a thing was a trivial matter for me. What if she runs away? My annoying mind spoke arrogantly. I stopped at the door and said, "We'll leave in 30 minutes." Looking at her shaking figure, I stopped. That girl almost looks like a dried leaf trembling because of a gust of wind. Given a chance, she might run away. The moment this thought occurred, I hesitated before leaving. I could handle anything but the idea of her leaving. I wanted my lungs filled with this familiar scent. A trace of anger crawled in my heart, and I narrowed my eyes at her. "If you dare to run away, I'll find you and suck you dry." An hour later, I found myself standing outside Brown's house, waiting for Emily. Hearing her crying voice, I frowned. But I had no intention to interrupt her private meeting with her grandfather. If I ever wanted to get her consent and attention, I would have to be compassionate and considerate. Did I have any choice? No. Not in front of that alluring rosy scent that could make me forget everything around me.